Hello, everybody. Welcome to this new webinar produced by the Cultural Considerations Working Group of the Moon Village Association in collaboration with the recently established MVA working group named Lunar Physiology and Biology. I am Remo Rapetti, co-chair of the Cultural Considerations Working Group. First of all, I would like to thank the Cyprus Space Exploration Organization, which is broadcasting this webinar in their very wide network on Facebook. The topic of today's webinar is indeed very important. We are going to talk about human health and microgravity. We all know that space travel involves considerable physical risks. Long duration exposure to zero gravity with very limited possibilities of movement and exposure to significant amounts of solar radiation produces a muscle atrophy, osteopenia, alterations in the production of red blood cells, cardiovascular dysfunction, etc. Moreover, quite a lot of psychological problems such as stress, boredom, and many other factors affecting safety, efficiency, and quality of life in space are also possible. With this webinar, we intend to examine the progress made by medicine and neuroscience to overcome the serious physical and psychological imbalances associated with the microgravity. To deal with such significant problems, we have invited two absolutely outstanding speakers. Elisa Raffaella Ferré is a professor of cognitive neuroscience at Birkbeck University in London, where she established the vestibular neuroscience laboratory. Moreover, she holds the position of co-coordinator for the UK Space Life and Biomedical Sciences Association and serves as the elected secretary for the European Low Gravity Research Association. Thais Rossomano is an MD from Brazil, specialized in internal medicine, has an MSc in aerospace medicine in USA, and a PhD in space physiology from King College in London. She is academically linked to several universities, is an elected academician of the International Academy of Aviation and Space Medicine and the International Academy of Astronautics. She's also co-founder and CEO of InnovaSpace UK and the chair of the recently established Lunar Human Physiology and Biology Working Group in MBA. After the presentations, Lisa Pettibone, a renowned artist and member of our working group, and Arthur Woods, a space artist and philosopher and co-chair of this same working group, will add comments and questions. Also, the registered attendees, of course, can ask questions via the chat button. And now, let's go down to the presentations. Professor Elisa Raffaella Ferré will talk about the next small step, how microgravity influences brain and behavior. Please, Elisa, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So just give me a second to share my screen, please. So I believe you should be able to see my screen and also hear me fine. If you can give me a heads up. All good?
Yeah.
Great. All right. So, hi everyone. It's a real pleasure to describe some of our research today. So thank you very much for inviting me, and I'm going to focus on how alterations in gravity might influence the brain and behavior. So clearly we are all aware that space travel has become a long way since the beginning in 1957. But we also need to remember that space is and remains a very hostile environment for human health. We can even consider that space is the ultimate frontier for our ability to adapt to a challenging environment. There are many different stressors that might affect human health in space. The stressors range from radiation, the presence of extreme temperatures, isolation, stress. But for me, what is most interesting is the fact that gravity is not the same as the one that we are used to on Earth. So my research is focusing on how microgravity affects human brain and behavior. I'm really interested to look at how brain responds to difference in gravity, because I believe that this is essential in order to ensure successful and safe space missions. So let's start to talk a little bit about what is gravity. Now, it's not easy to describe what is gravity, as we would be describing other features of our environment. I absolutely love a quote from Albert Einstein, who said that gravity is the first thing which you don't think about. Now, let's think about that. So gravity is a feature of our environment. We are constantly surrounded by gravitational acceleration. However, we do not perceive gravity as we would perceive a flash of light, a sound, or a mosquito on your skin. So gravity on Earth is 1g, which corresponds to 9.8 meter by second square acceleration, which is the pull that our planet is exerting on all the objects, including our own body as well as our own brain. Now, we are absolutely adapted to this 1g acceleration. We can interact easily with terrestrial gravitational environment. For example, we can easily detect whether objects are accelerating coherently or not with terrestrial gravitational acceleration, or we can even catch object that has been thrown to us and taking into account the trajectory and the gravity on that. So how does the brain represent gravity? Well, it's not a simple process, and it involves different sensory modalities, but clearly the most important one is probably the vestibular system. The vestibular system is a sophisticated set of organs inside our inner ear, which constantly detect the movement of your head in space and translate the movement in terms of linear and angular acceleration. What does it mean? Every time that you move your head around, as I'm doing right now, the vestibular system is telling to your brain the acceleration and the direction of movement. Now, the vestibular system is particularly important for detecting the position of your head with respect to gravity. Now, if your head is upright, inside your vestibular organ, you can see something like that, as I'm reporting in my slide. So there are going to be a lot of tiny stones, which are called otoliths, which line perfectly on balance on a fluid. Now, if you are upright, the stones are perpendicular to the direction of gravity and nothing is really happening. However, if you make a movement, for example, you tilt your head toward the back, the situation in the vestibular system is going to be totally different. Because of the presence of physical gravity on our planet, the otoliths will start to move. This is going to cause a movement in the air cell, which are vestibular receptors, and the air cells are then going to produce an action potential, which is a neural signal. So with a gap of just few milliseconds, your brain will know that your head is not longer aligned with the direction of gravity. Now, the brain is using vestibular cues in order to come up with a representation of gravity, but is also integrating vestibular cues with signal from visions, from our eye, from our limbs, we call it proprioceptive signal, as well as our internal organ. And all these signals are integrated in order to produce an internal model of Earth gravity. Now, you might not be aware, but every time that you are lifting your cup of tea, as I'm doing now, what is happening inside the brain is that all these information are pulled together in order to make you making a very successful movement and drink the tea. Now, this internal model of gravity is perfectly shaped on the amount of gravity that we have on Earth, which is 1g. But clearly the model is going to struggle in a gravity environment such as the lunar one, in which the amount of gravity is way less. And that's what I'm going to focus for the rest of my talk, starting by the fact that we know that there are alterations in body physiology triggered by alterations of gravity. Astronauts have reported feelings of aging very quickly during space missions, and we know that many different systems get affected by the alterations in gravity. For instance, the fluids start to shift because gravity is not longer there. The muscles start to shrink because no effort is required in making movement. And there is also a loss of bone density of about 10–15% during space missions. So what about our brain? Well, not surprising, also the brain gets affected by alterations in gravity. We know, for instance, that there is a reduced connectivity in the human brain after about 150 days of space missions. So here in the slide, what you can see is a slice of the human brain. This is called horizontal view, meaning that I'm cutting the brain at this level and I'm removing the top part. Highlighted in blue, there is an area that is called insula, and in particular here we are looking into the right insular, which is one of the core vestibular areas in the human brain. And it has been shown that after spaceflight, these areas stop to talk, let's say it in this way, to other critical areas of the brain, meaning that there is a reduced connectivity interaction between brain areas. Another striking change in brain anatomy and structure is the increase of the ventricles. So the size of the ventricles change during space flight, and it takes more than 6 months to go back to normal after space flight missions. Interesting, about 70% of astronauts report the so-called space motion sickness, which is a very strong motion sickness as soon as they are exposed to microgravity environment and as soon as they are back from microgravity. Space motion sickness is a clinical syndrome that comprises different symptoms, including dizziness, vertigo, headaches, fatigue, nausea, as well as disorientation. And it has been indeed highlighted how space motion sickness can alter performance in the first hours and days of space flight. For instance, no spacewalks are allowed during the first hours of space flight because space motion sickness could be a potential issue. Sensory and motor aspects are also impaired during exposure to microgravity. So here you can see an astronaut try to simply walk on the lunar surface, and as you can see, the performance is not as good as it will be on a terrestrial environment. Even something as easy as walking can be largely impaired when the amount of gravity is not longer the same. There are issues with balance, coordination and locomotion, as well proprioception, where your limbs are in space, as well as vision. And more recently, it has been suggested that cognitive impairment may occur during space flight, as well as dysfunctions in terms of psychological aspect, as well as psychosocial aspects. Now, taking together all these changing, I think that it is absolutely important to pay attention to how the brain adjusts to different in gravity in order to ensure human performance during space flight. So what do we do here? In my lab, what we are looking at is try to understand how the brain represents gravity on Earth, as well as how the brain adjusts to alterations of gravity. And we do that by combining classical space research methods such as parabolic flight and centrifuge studies with lab simulation of alterations of gravity. Why do I believe that it's important to look at lab simulations? Well, because we can have much larger samples as well as a better control environment for our experiments. I'm going to present you some example of research that we have done in the last couple of years, and I'm going to start with perception, so how changes in gravity might affect perceptual experience. And I'm going to describe an experiment that we have done looking at pain. Now, pain is a very important sensory modality because pain itself has an adaptive function. Pain can protect our organisms from the external environment. What we have done in the lab was sticking our participant on a 3D tilting table in which we can passively move the subject from upright gravity coherent orientation to head-down bed rest. Head-down bed rest is largely used in the space sector as an analog for microgravity. So in this condition, the participant is lying on the tilting table, but the head is 6 degrees below the feet, and this is causing a shift in fluid toward the head, as well as vestibular signaling that can mimic microgravity experience. So we have our healthy participants coming to the lab, strapped on a tilting table, and then we can passively move them in different orientations. And in this upright and head-down bed rest orientation, we ask participants to tell us about their pain threshold. So we apply sensor on the fingertip, we exert a force through that sensor, and we ask participants to tell us as soon as the force is no longer just a force, but a clear painful signal. Each dot in the plot is a subject, and as you can see, the pain threshold increase in head-down bed rest condition compared to upright, meaning that there is an analgesic effect. People were feeling less pain when they were in a altered gravity simulated environment. Interesting, we replicate the same results by using virtual reality. Now, maybe some of you are familiar with virtual reality. Is fantastic. It's a fantastic tool because we can easily trick the brain in order to believe that it's in a different gravitational environment. So if you have had the chance to play with virtual reality, you might know already what I'm talking about. If you didn't, please do it because it's just fantastic. So in virtual reality, our brain gets through something that in neuroscience we call visual capture, meaning that it starts to rely a lot on the visual information. And in this experiment, we use virtual reality with a full display. We show to participants objects that were moving coherent with terrestrial gravity acceleration or Martian gravity acceleration, while the participant was upright on a chin rest, meaning that the head was totally fixed and there was no possibility to move. Now, by fixing the head, vestibular signaling starts to rest because no upcoming information is going to be there, meaning that there is vestibular habituation. So vestibular signaling starts to downsize, and then we can use visual capture in order to trick the brain. So to cut the story short, we found exactly an analgesic effect during virtual reality Mars simulated gravity compared to terrestrial gravity. What about our ability to respond to motor signal? Now, responding to stimuli from the environment is absolutely essential. We need to know what's going on in the environment, and we need to act on our environment. We wanted to look at how people respond to environmental stimuli when microgravity is presented in a simulated lab experiment. How we did that? Well, we asked participants to hear hundreds of sounds. Believe me, hundreds of sounds. And 20% of time, the sound was the target, meaning that there was a change in the pitch. So 20% of time, they need to press a button as quick as they can, as soon as they hear the target sound. Now, we know that these studies is not only engaging the auditory areas in the brain, but much more broadly, some areas that are related to decision-making, getting ready to interact with the external environment. And what we found is that during this task, participants were significantly lower in the head-down bed rest compared to the upright orientation. And similarly, they were slower in VR simulated Martian gravity compared to terrestrial gravity. So taken together, these results suggest that pain perception is altered, there is an analgesic effect, and motor responses are way slower when the usual gravity is not longer there. Now, what about decision-making and high-level cognition? In a series of studies, we have shown that decision-making is suboptimal when people are asked to generate novel behavior in altered gravity, they are not doing a good job. They do not produce the right strategy. The behavior is suboptimal. On the other side, we also have shown that risk-taking behavior is increasing in head-down bed rest compared to upright, meaning that people are willing to take much more risks. And finally, we have recently demonstrated that cognitive flexibility, which means how good you are in changing your cognitive strategy in function of the task or the environment, we found that cognitive flexibility is impaired when people are in head-down bed rest compared to upright. So to summarize, there is an analgesic effect for pain. We found slow responses for interacting with external environment, suboptimal decision-making, willingness to take risks, and pure cognitive flexibility. So not really the best picture. Please let me highlight that these subjects are healthy participants, not heavily trained astronauts, but nevertheless, it's interesting to see how small changes in gravitational signaling can cause significant change in the behavior. So if small changes can cause significant changes in behavior, it might suggest that gravity is an absolute reference for shaping our behavior here on Earth. And this is an idea that we are looking at by considering gravity as a prior, as a model in order to shape our behavior on Earth in order to make it optimal. If this is the case, we would use gravity to represent other information about our body and the external environment. For instance, we might want to use gravity in order to build up a representation of weight. Now, you might remember from school that weight is given by mass by gravity. So we were wondering whether by changing the physical amount of gravity, the perception of weight might change. And for this experiment, we decided to focus in particular on the perception of weight of body parts because of some astronauts reports, such as Chris Hadfield, who said that right after I landed, I could feel the weight of my lips and the tongue. So having a clear experience of a percept that is not even normally detected. And also, to be honest, it was quite easy to ask participants to judge the weight of their hand and their head during a parabolic flight campaign because they were simply attached to the body of our subjects. So we went on a parabolic flight campaign in which, as you may know, the plane is making parabola in order to produce alterations of gravity. Here, the alterations of gravity are physical alterations. They are not simulated. And we can get 20 seconds of hypergravity with 1.8 G and 20 seconds of zero gravity. What we have done during this experiment was asking subjects to judge the weight of their hand and the head, and we found that systematically they were taking into account the current gravitational signal in order to shape their representation of weight, meaning that the weight was underestimated when participants were in microgravity and the opposite for hypergravity. We have been looking into this effect in much more details in a series of experiments as we have recently published, in which we found that actually the hand weight is systematically underestimated on Earth, probably because we want to be ready for movement. And this is a way for our brain to silence the gravitational information in order for us to be ready for movement. Another example, if I may, we have started looking into how gravity contributes to maintain a stable perceptual representation of our external environment. So how gravity can shape conscious experiences. In order to do that, we have used visual evoke auditory responses in which we ask participants how strong they feel sounds associated with visual stimuli. Now, the trick is that there are no sounds. The visual stimuli are absolutely silent. And during the experiment, participants are exposed to visually evoke auditory stimuli, such as the one that you can see here, is a pattern that is moving in frequency. And about 80% of people report to hear sounds when they see this visual image, although there's no sound whatsoever. And we also use a control stimulus, which is a frame extracted by that video, which is, of course, not associated with real sound. In this experiment, we use galvanic vestibular stimulation, in which we stuck a couple of electrodes on the mastoid of the subject. The mastoid is the bone behind your ear that you can feel if you touch behind your ear. And we deliver a type of waveform that is intended to mimic microgravity experience and altering the processing, well, the signaling of the vestibular nerve. Now, what we have found is that for both control stimuli, the one without movement and the one with movement, the probability to report that there was a sound was increased in both conditions, suggesting that altering vestibular gravitational signaling might change cortical excitability, and therefore it might make people more prone to perceive stimuli that are not actually present, they are not real in the environment. Now, these data are quite preliminary, so we are still working on that, but it's absolutely fascinating and promising, and we are very excited about this. Before I sum up, I would like to reflect with you on whether the gravity prior, which is so important for behavior, is innate or not. Now, I think that this question is interesting on many different levels. It's interesting per se by understanding whether gravity is innate or not. It's also interesting if we think about deep space missions and the future of space flight. So if we have such a strong prior that is innate, is there any possibility to shape it or not? Now, it's not easy on the other side to answer these questions because, yes, we are all here on Earth and we have been born here on Earth. So what we have done was giving up on human experiment and look into animal experiment. And in particular, we focus on behavioral predisposition in newborn chicks. Now, chicks, very interesting model because as soon as they are born, they have some predisposition, meaning that they have some innate sets of information that allow them to interact with the environment. That's it. The chick, as soon as they are born, they can move. The sensory motor systems are fully functional. They can explore the environment. And there is a clear understanding that the reason why they can do that is because they have some predispositions, some sets of information that they can use as soon as they hatch. So what we did was exploiting this model and look at whether chicks prefer objects that are gravity congruent or not. So we had a new hatch chick into this arena, as you can see here. And on the side of the arena, we had stimuli that were moving coherently or not with gravity direction. So we had stimuli that were moving down in a gravity congruent way, or they moving up. And also we play a little bit with acceleration and linear motion. I'll just show you a video of what happened in the experiment. We control when the chick hatch, we put them in the arena, and then we look with AI system to where they were going to go into the arena. So we divide the space in 3 areas, and then we monitor where the animal was going, for how long, and so on and so forth. So we have a series of parameters that seems to suggest that chicks prefer more stimuli that are moving according to gravity acceleration, but in particular, if the stimuli were moving upwards, suggesting that they not only have some innate representation of gravity, but also they do like objects that are moving against gravity, as you can see here in the video, because it might remind them about other animals. So we believe that is something related to biological motion. So I hope that I convinced you that the next small step might be focusing a little bit more on brain and behavior and having a better understanding on how alterations of gravity can change brain and behavior. Last year, with PhD of mine, Ikra Shad, we have been looking at a model that can describe the changes reported in the last 15 years of literature about effect of altered gravity on human behavior. In particular, we compare 2 models, and the data seems to suggest that in altered gravity, in microgravity, the first change that seems to occur is in vestibular gravitational signaling, and this is then going to cascade in a hierarchical way on sensory motor process and then on cognition and social affect aspects of our behavior. So if we are thinking about providing some altered gravity substitution during space flight, we probably need to think about low-level vestibular gravitational processing and sensory motor control before going into cognition and social affective aspects. As I mentioned at the beginning of my talk, gravity is a sensory signal, but let me say that it is a very peculiar sensory signal. It does not produce a phenomenological experience as vision, touch, taste can provide. It's always on. We cannot switch it off. Gravity is always present. And I don't believe it's just a background environmental signal. It's something that is extremely important to shape our behavior. So the vestibular system, which is detecting gravity, is completely different compared to the other sensory modalities, is fully myelinated at birth, and is also fully functional before birth, suggesting that vestibular and gravity information are absolute reference for shaping human behavior. And on this note, I would highlight that in order to assess the future of spaceflight, whether it's deep space flight mission to Mars or moon-related missions, we need to keep in mind two different aspects: proper training before flight, as well as in-flight support. And when I'm thinking about in-flight support, I'm considering systems that can allow easier transition between different gravities, as well as providing support for altered vestibular gravitational signaling. I hope that I didn't take too much time, and I also hope that I was not too fast, and I'm happy to take questions. And please let me thank my lab and the people working with me here at Birkbeck, as well as my collaborator. And if you have questions you want to reach out later, here you can see my email. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Lisa. It was a very brilliant paper. Thank you. And now I give the floor. I take my video on. Okay. And now I give the floor to Professor Thais Russomano. The title of her presentation is Space Medicine, Challenges and Achievement. Thank you, Thais.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me here. It's a pleasure to contribute to this webinar. Congratulations, Elisa, for your presentation. I really enjoyed and I learned a lot. Since we are both in London, maybe we should meet for coffee some point in time without the need of a screen in between. So let me find my presentation. Can you see it?
Yes, now. Yes.
Yes? Okay, so, well, I would like to present some aspects related to space medicine. And because it's about 20 minutes now, my presentation, of course, it's impossible to summarize everything. So I'm going to point out the most important aspects that I think that it's a good take-home message. Emphasize the challenge that we have as a space doctors or space physiologists, space life science scientists, and some of the achievements, of course, over the period that we've been exploring space with the presence of humans, that start back in 1961 with Gagarin. So, well, sorry, I think that jumped to the end. I want to be quick, but not that quick. Sorry about that. Okay, so in terms of our roadmap for human space exploration, we have three main challenges, which is missions around our planet, they called the low Earth orbit missions, which is called LEO missions. They coming back to the moon, which is going to be very important in the next few years, and possibly a trip to Mars in the near future. So we are always postponing this trip to Mars, and I can tell you that the reason for that is because of the lack of knowledge in the area that I've been involved in for a long time, over 30 years now. That's basically space medicine or space health, in considering, of course, other areas related to the well-being of astronauts during their missions. So if you look at the LEO missions, you are going to have issues related to astronauts in missions in the International Space Station or the Chinese Space Station or space tourism. So, and it is going to be very important to have this in our minds when we talk about LEO missions, because it's changing very fast. As I always say, the exploration of space is changing hands. We are moving from a more, let's say, concentrated project run by governments, and now we have the private sector taking over, which changed completely the scenario, not just for the missions themselves, but also for the people like me dedicated to keep the space travelers healthy during their flights. So if you consider the LEO missions, which could be the most important aspects that can challenge someone that is inside, that is enjoying a trip to space, let's say a space tourist or even an astronaut in a long-term space mission at the ISS, the International Space Station. So I think that there are four main challenges. Now, the first one is, of course, microgravity, as it was discussed before. Gravity is an extremely important aspect of our development. And when we are in space, in fact, you are not in microgravity, you are in a free fall, a continuous free fall. So the spacecraft is traveling at 27,000 kilometers per hour. And then it gives the effect of microgravity. You are falling without falling, but we are continuously falling towards Earth. That's the definition that we should use for the microgravity that we have in orbital missions. Radiation, of course, as we are in space, we are start losing the protection of our atmosphere, and we are still protected in LEO missions by the magnetosphere, but we lose the atmosphere itself. So we are in between, let's say, these two layers of protections. By losing one, we are already exposed to much more, let's say, intense and disruptive radiation effects. The human mind in space, and I'm going to touch some aspects later on about the social and the psychological, emotional aspects of a space flight, because it is impossible not to consider that. Even if you train someone very well, you select someone very well, this to be in space will affect their behavior, as it was shown by Elisa, but also the emotional side and the social side interactions that astronauts might have during a space mission. And I bring here another aspect, which is the circadian rhythm. As I mentioned, the spacecraft is traveling at 27,000 kilometers per hour. It gives in a space of 24 hours 16 sunsets and 16 sunrises, which means that in every 90 minutes, an hour and a half, we have a complete day for the astronaut. So it disrupts our biological clock that gives us more awake, or should be more awake in the morning and sleep at night, and we are hungry about noon, 1 p.m., because it is set by our biological clock. And this is completely disrupted when you are in orbit. When you go to the moon, then you have another environment that you have to deal with. It's not just the microgravity radiation of space or this challenge that I just mentioned, but we need to deal with the aspects of the moon itself. So we have to remember that there is no atmosphere. So no atmosphere, no protection, no offer against radiation or meteorites and asteroids. There is no way to get oxygen or even water, so there is no rain on the moon. Everything, all that's added up would challenge the way that we are going to live on the moon one day. We have lots of moon dust, and the moon dust can interfere with the health of the astronaut and also with equipment, with the habitat, and so on. It's very intense, the moon dust on the moon, very present. One good aspect is that the distance between the moon and the Earth is roughly, let's say, roughly between 350 to 400,000 kilometers, which at the speed of light would give us a way to communicate basically at real time, which allows us to use telehealth or telemedicine in a very, very good way, you know. And on the moon, because the moon has a mass that's much smaller than the Earth, we are going to have what's called hypogravity. So if let's just roughly consider that someone is 60 kilos here, will be roughly 10 kilos on the moon or 12 kilos on the moon, which is a huge drop, of course, in the weight of the person. And this is something that can affect the way that the person moves, relates to the environment, and even work. When we talk about the moon, to go back to the moon, we have to remember some aspects of this trip, of this possible development of habitats on the moon. We are going to have something similar to the Apollo project, which gave us lots of important information related to how humans behave, for example, in a hypogravity environment. Very unfortunate, in my opinion, it was the program was closed by 1972. So basically, we spent 50 years plus without any without any knowledge coming from how to live on another celestial body, not planet, but our natural satellite that could have improved our, let's say, possibility to go to Mars. And not just that, but we could have profited so much in terms of technology, medicine, and other related areas. But one important aspect that is a huge difference between the Apollo project and the Artemis project is that we are going to have a space station around the moon, which is called Gateway. And when you have this space station about the moon, the astronauts can stay there for a while before reaching the surface of the moon. And that in that moment, they will be in microgravity. So they will be in microgravity during the period to the moon, or during the trip to the moon, and they can stay in microgravity around the moon and then in hypogravity on the moon, and with all the other challenges that I just mentioned. So this is important because depending on the way that let's say that the protocol of the profile of the mission is designed, we are going to have more time in microgravity, which could affect how the human body will respond and adapt to the hypogravity of the moon. Just as another important aspect is the trip to Mars, the human trip to Mars, which will add other challenge to space life science scientists, physiologists, and doctors. That is basically the distance. We are going to be between 55 to 400 million kilometers apart, which means that telemedicine or telehealth for a very, let's say, quick type of input from the doctors or professionals from Earth, it will be almost impossible, because it is not at the speed of light. You are going to take at least 3 minutes each way. And when the planets are far apart, it can take up to 24 minutes each way of the communication. You can still use telehealth and telemedicine, but not for a quick, let's say, response to an emergency or an accident that happens on Mars with one of the astronauts. So this is something that is really, it's a huge concern because Mars is even more hostile than the moon. Now you have a very low barometric pressure, basically no existence, but you still have some atmosphere there. But this atmosphere is 96% CO2. It's a toxic gas for humans. The temperature is very low. Now, a good aspect, let's say, if you compare the moon, is that the hypogravity on Mars is a bit less than on the moon. So if it's like 6 times less on the moon, it's about 3 times less on Mars. Taking that same person that was 60 kilos on Mars, oh, sorry, on Earth, and 10 to 12 kilos on the moon, here will be about 20 kilos. So it doesn't change enormously, but it is more in favor, let's say. And there is also a possible disruption in the emotional side of the person, or the astronaut, because he or she will look at our planet and just gonna see a dot, a very small dot in the sky, which we see Mars from here, which can be very disruptive in terms of their emotions, their psychology. And you need to remember that when you travel to Mars, as when you travel to the moon, that we are in microgravity. The moon is about, I think that I didn't mention, but it is about 3 days. But to the moon, to Mars, you are going to take months, like up to 9 months, 6 to 9 months, depend on the literature that you read. And then it's a long period. And both, if you consider the moon and Mars, we are completely in deep space, so there is no more protection against radiation. You don't have the magnetosphere to protect us as we have it when we are in the LEO missions. So all that scenario will bring us to many questions related to the humans in space. And when I say humans in space, I'm talking about men and women. And we know for sure that men and women here on Earth is very clear that they have lots of anatomic and physiological difference, but also in the expression of some diseases. Immune disease, for example, are much more common in female patients or people than in male individuals. So we need to take it into account. When you are designing all these missions, you need to know that men and women will also react different to this acclimatization to space, microgravity, hypogravity, radiation, and so on. When we talk about missions and medically, with talking, we need to also consider if is it a short-term mission or is a long-term mission, because we are going to have different reactions from our body to this to the length of the exposure to space. If it is, for example, 2 weeks or a month or 3 months, it's going to be very different from 6 months plus, for example. So we need to know all these aspects when you talk about either try to understand how the body is going to react to this challenge. Also, when we design protocols here on Earth, in terms of how we are going to study these volunteers, in microgravity or hypogravity simulations. And then we could add something even more complex, which is the space travelers or space tourists, as some call them. And we can see here in these pictures that Stephen Hawking is floating in microgravity in a parabolic flight. And this is, for me, it has a huge message, that all this, let's say, profile that we used to have for men and women, astronauts, cosmonauts, that were very well selected and very well trained. They were physically fit, very healthy, about a mean of 40 something, mid 40s nowadays. We know that that's the average. Now we are going to deal with a very different scenario. We are going to have people that might have chronic disease, taking chronic medications, people that have are less fit, they are not as prepared. And we can see here that Stephen Hawking, that had a very important neuromotor disease, that he couldn't move by himself or talk by himself. So he was not fit, let's say, for a space mission, he was in a parabolic flight. So maybe this is the message there. You know, fame, money might get the ticket for someone to explore space. And this is not that it's impossible, not that's not some point in time to not become the common way to go into space, but it creates a new challenge for the space life science scientists, as all the previous travelers, space travelers, were very fit and healthy. So I know that not all of you are doctors or even in the area of medicine or related areas. So I will just summarize some aspects of what is known, or something that we already achieved in terms of knowledge of space physiology that happens to someone that's basically exposed to the microgravity of low Earth orbit missions. So what is important here is that if you look at this figure, you see that each line represents a body system, each color, no? And you can see that very easily. You can just looking at that, you can see that some react very quickly and then basically adapt very quickly. So going back to that set zero G set point, or you have something that is, let's say, responding slower and adapting slower. Let's take the red line here, the cardiovascular system, in opposite to the neurovestibular system that goes up. Now the line goes up very quickly and comes down very quickly as well. So you have this change in the way that our body responds. And if we take the dark blue line, you can see that the bone, we lose bone density, but it is continuously. No, doesn't adapt. So this is very important information, because remember that I mentioned, well, we need to know if it's a short-term mission or a long-term mission. And it is clear from this picture that if it's a short-term mission, I have to be very much concerned about my brain, my neurovestibular system, as Elise was talking about, and maybe the cardiovascular system as well, but not as much as for the bones and muscles. For example, if I stay in space for a week, no, it is not that, it is important, not saying the opposite, but it is not that important as other body systems. And of course, for that, as we know that we have physiological change that will happen if we want or not in our bones, muscles, and so on and so forth. One way to counteract that is through exercise. So the astronauts are trained to exercise using different equipment and adapting this equipment for microgravity. So a treadmill, a cycle ergometer, and a type of exercise that's basically a resistive type of exercise that is very, very good for bones and muscles. So they exercise 2.5 hours per day, 6 times a week. If you consider the emotional side, we have lots of change in the way that we behave, but also in the way that we deal with our situation. If it's a short-term mission, it's different from a long-term mission. People in short-term missions become more enthusiastic, and they don't get that, they don't feel that isolated or depressed. But in long-term missions, after 6 months, for example, you can feel the isolation, we can feel the monotony. Sometimes you want to go to space, you want to be there, but if you stay too long, you might find it a bit monotonous. So we have communication issues with the crew. The crew is becoming progressively more diverse, with people from different religious backgrounds, and men, women, different nationalities, and so on. So it is more difficult now than previously, when you have had a set of, let's say, one type of astronaut, one gender, one kind of background, same age and same country, etc., etc. So nowadays, everything is more dynamic, which is, in my opinion, very good, but it imposes some risks. And here we have ways of countermeasure that. Of course, as we have countermeasures for the body, the physical body exercising, we can also have countermeasures for the mind. So to play music together or alone. Now we can even play some games with friends here on Earth, and you can have moments of socialization with your colleagues. So there are ways that are being more, let's say, considered during the space missions for the astronauts to improve their well-being and performance. And there is the daily activities of the astronauts that can influence not just their well-being, but their health as well. For example, if you are sleeping in space for a week or a month or even 6 months, we know that the quality and the quantity of sleep decrease per day. If we are asked to sleep for 8 hours, you sleep about 6, and the pattern of your sleep, some aspects related to the waves of your brain, change during the exposure to microgravity. And you can see here, for example, that you have no privacy. There is always lights on and noise. So it really affects the sleep in your mission, or your sleep in your mission. So if you also consider aspects related to the hygiene or going to the toilet, that is, nobody talks too much about that, but it is very embarrassing sometimes, and it comes to a point, it comes to this topic that is related to female menstruation. Should women menstruate in space or not? Because there is no way to have a good hygiene, and you have all these aspects related to going to the toilet, which is not very comfortable. You have, for example, a lack of shower in space. I always say that, well, we talk about go to Mars and create, let's say, habitats on the moon, but we do have no shower in space, which is very strange. But it affects the hygiene of the astronauts, and many times affect the mood and the well-being of the astronauts. Diet has improved a lot since the beginning, since this 1960s, that we had like a kind of toothpaste type of food. Nowadays we can have everything. And this is important not just for the well-being, but as a countermeasure to many aspects related to the effects of microgravity in our body. So this is something that there is a huge area inside space life science that is called space nutrition, diet in space, which is extremely important. And on top of all that, all these aspects related to the daily activities, all these aspects related to the emotional and physical adaptation to this environment of space, we can get sick in space. So on top of that, you can also get sick, have respiratory problems or infectious disease and so on. So here is just a summary, just a table showing that some aspects are the frequency of, let's say, of this, some events, some aspects that have affected astronauts during the space shuttle program era. So it is a good example that you can have on top of everything that we are facing, if you want or not, in space. You can also get sick. Radiation is a topic that is a vast topic, and of course it's not a lecture, it's a course, that you can give about radiation in space and the effects on humans. But just this chart I like very much because it really summarizes now and makes it very clear that here on the ground, the first body, you have a annual cosmic radiation exposure, and then you can have the last bar, which is 500 days on Mars, or you can have 6 months on ISS, which is the yellow one. So we can see that as we are away from Earth, you become more, let's say, exposed to radiation. And radiation is not good because it can create lots of cardiovascular, neurological diseases, and also cancer. When you talk about going to Mars and going to the moon, we need to start consider other areas that are not very well explored, like surgery in space, anesthesia in space. It's very, very important because some point in time, someone will have a problem that will need that. There is a group led by Campbell that has done lots of parabolic flights trying to explore this area. And here I bring something that is always in my mind, a concern that is, I'm very lucky to have a Professor Marlise, a very good friend and colleague for over 20 years. She's a space pharmacist. And what is important is that space pharmacy mimics what we use here on Earth in terms of medication. For example, if I use here, let's say, a tablet that is 40 milligrams every 8 hours, the same is used in space. Although you know that the pharmacodynamics, which means that the way that I absorb the medication, that I distribute the medication in my body, that I metabolize the medication, let's say my liver, and then excrete in my urine, is completely different. So we need more studies and need to understand it more, especially now that you are going to start bringing space tourists initially to orbit and one day to the moon, because we are going to deal with people that possibly have chronic disease and have been and are under some treatment with tablets or injections or whatever. So what can we do now if we knowing all that, knowing that we are going to environments that are very challenging, that from the moment that you are inserted in microgravity, you start changing your behavior or perception of the environment, your body changes and your sleeping habits change, and so on and so forth. So first you need to train astronauts. You have to understand that very few astronauts are doctors. So in missions in general, you don't have doctors on board. That's why it's very important to rely on doctors and health professionals here on the ground. But you need to know how to collect data, how to collect blood, how to collect, let's say, or to perform a ultrasound. You need to know how to do that. So you have to have this training and how to connect with Earth and then using telemedicine during the mission. So as I mentioned, during LEO missions and also the moon missions, it will be very easy because it's basically real-time communication. So you can collect data, can monitor, the astronauts can interfere or support medical emergencies and help evaluate astronauts during their psychological or physical changes. So just here, just an example of an astronaut that had a blood clot in one of the vessels in his neck, and it was completely supported, let's say, treated by doctors here on the ground, which was life-saving. The telemedicine is not just using during the missions, but nowadays it's also used as soon as the astronaut lands on the ground and data start being transmitted to doctors and health professionals in the control center. So this is from 2017, that ESA started using this model. But I think that's very important because it gives the support when the astronaut is in the post-flight, immediate post-flight, which is another challenging moment because then everything comes back, including the acceleration of gravity. If you are on Mars, as I mentioned, telemedicine is not the way to go. So we have delays in communication that can range from 3 minutes to 22, 24 minutes. So it is not the best way to do it. And you know that the person had experienced microgravity for months and then is in a very hostile environment, in hypogravity, but with also exposure to radiation and all that other aspects that I mentioned related to Mars. And so anything can happen, not just aspects related to accident, incidents, but also a disease that can affect the astronaut. So we need to have very good robots that are going to act as doctors in space missions in deep space or in habitats on the moon, because we are going to need very sophisticated and smart algorithms to identify a disease or give a diagnosis and even suggest a kind of management, treatment of that particular situation, medical situation. So this is mandatory. And of course, now the digital world can bring even more to us with the possibility of immersive training in terms of exercise in space or how microgravity can affect your body and so on and so forth. So it is can help with, for example, as I mentioned, this is the same slide that I mentioned before, the laparoscopic surgery in microgravity in a parabolic flight, but you can use augmented reality or even virtual reality to help with that. And very recently, it was the first doctors were transferred, by teleportation to the International Space Station as a hologram. So all that combined can help space tourism, astronauts in orbit, and astronauts one day on the moon living over there, or when they are staying in the gateway, or one day to Mars. Just to finalize, I want to say that we are evolving on this planet for millions and millions and millions of years. We always had gravity, we always had everything that we have now. So we got to a stage that we call ourselves Homo sapiens sapiens. But I think that we are now going to another dimension, in terms of evolution. We are becoming Homo sapiens spatium, because we are going to be somehow extraterrestrial beings very soon. And when we start reproducing in space, and believe me, space reproduction is a kind of taboo area still. We don't know much about that, but one day we might be reproducing in space or on the moon, and we are going to become a very different type of being, because we are what we are, because we are from Earth. If you had, for some reason, developed our civilization on Mars, we would be a completely different type of being. So we are what we are because we are here. And as soon as we start developing our life in colonies on the moon or on Mars one day, it is going to change our behavior, our emotions, our body, the way that we live socially and so on, completely. We are going to become a very different human being. So with that, I thank you again for listening to my presentation. I hope it was not very boring. And I tried to somehow summarize the space medicine challenge and achievement for people, for you, for the audience, that I know that's not just composed by doctors. So I tried to use a language that everybody could understand. So thank you very much for your attendance.
Thank you, Thais. Great presentation. It was very clear and in-depth. And now, Lisa, where are you? Lisa?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. I don't see you.
Yeah, I can't actually get video going for some reason.
I see. Anyway, do you have comments, questions?
Yes. Hold on. I'll just start the video. There we go. Yeah, thank you for both those presentations. So much to think about that we have to conquer actually trying to live in space. I think my first question is for Elisa. She mentioned something about a type of ghost symptom from having visual stimuli that becomes, you have an auditory ghost-like symptom. And I thought that was really interesting. Can you give me some sort of example how that might affect somebody actually living in space? Is there a crossover between the senses at times?
Thank you, Lisa. As a neuroscientist, I won't call it ghost signal. I would just call it a change in the threshold between the signal and noise. I mean, becoming more liberal in detecting information that are not really coming from environmental stimuli. So what we use were these patterns that we know are generating some sort of auditory sensation, although auditory signal, physical auditory waveform are not really there. And probably the reason is that the visual information can evoke some sort of auditory processing into the brain, and by interconnection between visual and auditory area, participants report that the signal is present. Now, in our studies, what we have found is that the probability of reporting the signal as present is much higher during alteration of gravities. So, as I say, these are a little bit preliminary results, but imagine that you have a threshold for judging what is real and what is not real. We are constantly bombarding from environmental signal in our entire life. So your brain is constantly using this threshold in order to say that is real and is salient or not. Now, our idea is that when the usual gravity is not there, when there are alterations of gravity, it may be possible that these thresholds change and some information that we won't pick up as relevant, it becomes suddenly relevant. And therefore the boundaries between what is real and not get blurred. And yeah, I think that the implications are evident, right? Because if you send someone to Mars and these conscious perceptions are not really realistic, then there might be, consequences in their behavior as well as their performance.
Yeah, for instance, they might find these auditory signals annoying or make it difficult to concentrate or something. I was going to ask, thank you for that. I was going to ask Thais about kind of physical symptoms in long-term flights. And this is, does actually low gravity affect your digestion in some way? So the way you eat food and the way it moves through your body, is that going to change? Oh, I think she's mute.
I was mute.
Okay.
If I get a pound for every time that it happens to me, I would be a billionaire by now. But in any case, yes, your diet is also the way that you eat in space in microgravity is also affect, as I was mentioned, for the medication, because it floats in your stomach, let's say, and in your intestines. So the way that you absorb is completely different. The way that you metabolize it in your liver is also different. And apparently the intestine becomes a bit slower in the way that it moves, let's say, the food. One important aspect that, except for one mission that I think that was a mission at the Mir space station, every single mission that they measure the calories consumed by astronauts per day, they were lower than what was expected or requested, in fact. So it means that you need less calories in microgravity. As Elise was saying, we behave differently, we become slower. And when I was in a parabolic flight, in fact, I had the opportunity to participate in 2 campaigns. In both campaigns, when I was moving around, I was moving slower, much slower than here on the ground. So maybe for some, not just because of that, but other reasons, we need less food in space or less calories in space. But as diet, it is very important now to consider the aspects related to proteins and calcium, which is also lower. The calcium is also lower than what is expected or requested per day, consumed per day. So it is quite a very important and still unknown area. That's food or nutrition in space.
Sorry, I hope you don't mind me jumping on this topic, but I'm Italian and I cannot help myself when we talk about food. I need to add something. So, of course, there is the intake of calories, and Thais mentioned, and the importance of the diet, but there is another aspect related to food and eating that is the pleasure of eating, right? And we know that because of the shift in fluids that are going towards the head, smell is also different in space, and taste might also be different. So this is another issue about creating food that are well balanced for the diet, but they also maintain some taste and smell that can be, pleasure for the astronauts and cosmonauts to eat. For instance, it has been shown that the level of spices and the strength of taste need to be highly increased compared to what people would normally find pleasant on Earth, because of this shifting fluid and misperception of taste and smell. Sorry, I couldn't help myself.
Great. Arthur, I see that there are some questions in the chat, but
Yes,
please, if you have some comments, please go ahead.
I'm quite interested in this topic very much about the effect of gravity on the arts. I mean, we grew up on the earth. We've evolved on the earth, and so I mean, every sculpture ever made on earth was influenced by gravity because we perceive it, how it stands or sits. We look at paintings; they have an up and a down, mostly. So I mean, this is a big thing. So yeah, I did some investigation on that myself on the Mir space station with a sculpture on the Mir. But anyway, going to the chat, we have three questions from Aman Jamil. And I think I say them all at the same time. The first one, how do microorganisms behave in microgravity? I think it's interesting. Are there any positive effects of microgravity on the body? And the last one, what are the effects of microgravity on reproductive systems? So these are definitely physiological questions here for you guys. So have a go at it.
Okay. Well, the first one was about, sorry,
How do
about
microorganisms behave in
yeah,
microgravity?
yeah. It is some microgravity have been studied in space, to see the effects of microgravity in radiation, and it seems that they some of them at least become more aggressive. So this is not good news if you consider the possibility of an infection in space. There is this lack of knowledge of how some drugs that you know very well here on Earth, like antibiotics, for example, for bacteria, would really, let's say, be if they would be very effective or the same way they have if they have the same effectiveness that they have here on Earth. So it's a very important area. It's something that we try to avoid, of course, in space missions, is to decrease contacts before the mission so you don't carry virus into space. I have the opportunity to do some studies using a clinostat, a 3D clinostat, looking at the immune system. And very unfortunately, microgravity per se, no, not talking about being stressed or anything, so because just cells that were inside the clinostat decrease their proliferation, which means that the immune system becomes less active in space. So if you have this combination of a less active immune system plus a more aggressive microorganism, then it's not good. The second question, if there is any positive effect, yes, there are some positive effects. One of them, in fact, was in the area that I did my PhD here at King's College, which is the lungs, the lung function in space. Lungs, my final conclusion of my PhD after 3-4 years of study was like, if you were just lungs maybe with a brain on top and a pair of feet at the bottom, would be very adapted to microgravity because the lungs react very well to microgravity. It is the organs that improve their function. I think that two other aspects that are very positive is that as it creates a very unique type of environment, we can learn more and test our own theories in this type of environment, because one aspect of science is that if it is correct, whatever we conclude, and we extrapolate to other environments, let's say, we could guess more or less what it would happen. And then sometimes it gives some surprise in space, which means that we are learning from space in terms of what we know here on Earth. And because gravity is everywhere, we cannot just, let's delete gravity to see what happens now to the body. And the third question was about the reproduction system. Yes, this is it's still a big question mark because some studies were conducted looking at frogs, reproduction of frogs and mice in space, but not humans. And when you talk about, for example, pregnancy in space, it's not just the pregnancy itself. There are some aspects, the step by step of getting pregnant and develop the fetus and so on. It's very complex, and we do not know if in each aspect of that, in microgravity, not talking even about radiation, not even going there, but if just the effect of microgravity, how it would affect all these stages, let's say, from the fecundation to the way that the egg is established in the uterus and how it grows and so on and so forth. There are many aspects related to reproduction that is still a question mark, because very unfortunately, this is a taboo. No, it's a kind of this sex in space is a taboo. No, we don't know about what happens to the sexual life, let's say, or the sexual desire or whatever in space. It's not a topic. But if you talk about going to the moon, for example, and establish a habitat there, at some point in time, things just will start happening. No? So I think that my physiological side, I try to respond very quickly.
Okay. Okay, we have one other comment in the chat. It's from Paul Zilberman. He's a medical doctor from Israel. He says, just a comment, he says, the calories necessary in space are lower than on Earth as there are no need for mechanical work. And for the same reason, there's no need of the same hemoglobin like on Earth. In fact, there's an entity called anemia of space. So that's his comment on that. So I guess it's something that the physiologists will pay attention to.
Yeah, no, I know Paul very well. He's a good friend. Yeah, and for sure there is a lack in this mechanical, let's say, activity, but there is a huge psychological demand. I remember when I was in microgravity, the first parabolic flight, especially the first campaigns, 3 days on a row, and then I was like, oh, in the beginning it is so tiring because everything that you take for granted doesn't it's not there anymore. So it is very tiring. Although you are not physically active, you are mentally very active.
Great.
Can I add a question? Um, it's recent news that the Italian astronaut that is now on the ISS brought along spaghetti. Do you think that they will digest it? And will they taste the same?
I leave that to Elisa.
Well,
Today.
I'm afraid they might be a little bit disappointed if they were expecting the same taste as in a proper Italian restaurant here on Earth, because of the reason that I was explaining earlier. So there are physiological changes in the fluids. The lack of gravity makes the fluids shifting towards the head, meaning that the mouth and nose area, of course, get with a different configuration compared to ground earth environment. So how we taste and how we associate the experience of taste to our previous experience is not that simple perception, meaning that we need to combine taste and smell, and we have memories about that. So I was very happy to see the news. I'm afraid to hear that they didn't find them the best spaghetti ever, but I might be wrong.
Thank you.
We have another question in the chat, also from a medical doctor, Paul Cordova, and he asks, what's the likelihood of having blood clots in microgravity?
Oh, that's a very, very important question, because I use that example, which I think that is a very, very good example of how telemedicine can help in LEO missions, no astronauts with clinical issues. Well, this is quite important because thanks to this event, which was very dangerous and terrible, but one positive outcome, let's say, was that people start studying more this flow, let's say, of blood, this venous flow of blood from the head to the heart. Normally, we drain our blood from the head and neck to the heart. And what was found is that not just there is a very slow blood flow, which is one of the, let's say, the causes for a clot to happen, but also sometimes there is no flow So, and this really promotes the possibility of clots. And more, I think that what is really very astonishing is that sometimes the flow is reversed. So it goes from the heart to the head, not what is normally what happens here on Earth. So all that opened up a huge area of investigation. And I was very lucky to be part of a selected group of his team that we study as a topical team the possibility of this thromboembolism that's called, or the formation of clots in space and the blood flow in space, especially venous blood flow. So what I can see now, because I've been in this area for 30 years, so I could see the evolution of that. What I can see now is that we just don't recognize and identify change. We are now in a second level, let's say, of investigation, which is to go deeper in relation to all these adaptations, which is wrong. No, I learned from a biologist that after a lecture that I gave, that I was using the wrong word. It's not adaptation, it's acclimatization, because adaptation means that we have changed our DNA or our species in a way that we become adapted to that environment. So acclimatization. This is something that I believe will progress, but very unfortunate, this area of medicine is very slow in its progression if you compare to other areas like space engineering, space IT, space astrophysics, and it is really very slow. It is a pity because we cannot explore space safely if we do not have enough information for not just the astronauts, cosmonauts, and so on, but also for the space tourists. Imagine now sending people that have diseases into space. Older people, less qualified in terms of body fitness, or even mental fitness, and taking medications, and don't know because the astronauts are healthy. So how can you know? How can you know the influence of microgravity in someone that's diabetic? And even if it's a simple one that is taking pills, not even insulin, or even if you are taking insulin, but you are controlled here, are you going to be controlled there? So questions and questions. Very exciting time.
Good. Remo, I think we've run out of time.
Yes, we have still 3 minutes. So I think that I can ask Elisa another question. Is there someone, anyone, who works on finding solutions to psychological disadvantages?
That's a great question. So Thais highlighted how difficult is human exploration and research into human exploration already. I hope you don't mind me say that investigating the brain and behavior is even more difficult. Now, this is probably coming from traditional expectations that astronauts are almost superhero and everything is going to be fine. If you think about what we know in terms of brain and behavior is so much more recent than what we know in terms of bone and muscles. So we are still at the beginning, in my opinion, maybe not right at the beginning, but we are, we are not that advanced in our knowledge. And in terms of systems to compensate for lack of gravity on human cognition and psychological aspects, I don't think that apart of good training, we have anything else at the moment. In terms of psychological support, we know that astronauts are having psychological support session very rarely during the space missions. So yeah, I think that my answer is we are not that advanced compared to other physiological systems when we talk about brain behavior and the psychological aspect related to that.
Okay, I think that now we have finished our time, and I thank you all. It was a very interesting webinar. We learned a lot from it. Thais, Elisa, Arthur, Lisa, thank you very much. See you soon.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Thank you.